Hi and welcome to Beyond the Game with me, Summer Hunter. Here's what's in the lineup on today's show. It may not have been record-breaking rugby, but that doesn't take anything away from England's successful Six Nations defence. A fifth title in the desert, can anybody stop the Fed Express rolling back up the rankings? And as Australia and India grind out a draw, we ask cricketing legend Steve Waugh, can Test cricket survive the new generation? After all the hype and the build-up, the England rugby team didn't quite make history in Dublin, but they still walk away with their second title in as many years. It was far from the open, high-scoring Super Saturday that many would have liked to see, but it still gave us plenty to talk about. Dowie Priest has more.
A not-so-super Saturday, at least in terms of the final scores. England came into the final weekend of the Six Nations with the title already guaranteed, but they had other things on their mind against Ireland. Back-to-back Grand Slams and the chance for a world record number of Test victories in a row. But just as New Zealand found out last year, the men in green are not a team that rolls over.
I thought the first 20 minutes we were really, really good. We put a lot of pressure on them. We played with width. In difficult conditions.
We're all human beings, and we're not perfect. And that's why world records finish at 18 games or 17 games. It's so hard to keep going because, you get a team on a day that performs above themselves. We were below ourselves.
England took their second title in a row, while Ireland managed to haul themselves up to second place. Italy, meanwhile, failed to win a single game for the third time in the last 4 tournaments. They were humbled by an under-par Scottish side who gave parting coach Vern Cotter the perfect send-off. Homegrown Gregor Townsend now prepares to take over a resurgent side sitting 5th in the world rankings. But it was the match in Paris that had fans and pundits still scratching their heads on Monday.
It's what I would call a heroic finish to the game. As a veteran, I've never experienced that kind of ending.
After a pretty uneventful 80 minutes, France were within a score of snatching a late victory with the last play of the game. But repeated Welsh penalties and some lost-in-translation moments with the officials meant the clock rumbled on for a full 20 minutes of added time, before France finally crashed over the line. 2 controversial incidents during that extra time are now under review, including an alleged bite on Welsh winger George North and a controversial late injury substitution in the French front row.
Process leading up to the change of the French tight head, the way that process occurred, we love our game too much to have those decisions and ultimately have the outcome of the game. It's usually disappointing.
All eyes are now on the Wales and Lions coach Warren Gatland, who has the unenviable task of picking a British and Irish side. Easier said than done when you're coming up against the best team in the world, the New Zealand All Blacks.
He's been our go-to man throughout the championship, so we caught up with rugby commentator Ali Aiken after he returned from Dublin to look back on a final round filled with highs and lows.
I think the rugby, by and large, was not that thrilling. Certainly the first game between Scotland and Italy was terrible, frankly. I thought it was very, very poor quality. There were so many knock-ons, so many errors, so much stop-start. The Italians just clearly didn't know how to get a point. They just couldn't kick anything from the tee. Every time they got near the try line, they spilt it. Scotland put them away reasonably clinically in the end, but it was poor quality to watch. Obviously, the Welsh in Paris, again, a match that was largely devoid of enormous excitement right up until the end, when the whole thing just seemed to kick off in the extra time that was played, all 20 minutes of it. It was total chaos. I don't think anybody really knew what was going on. I thought Wayne Barnes handled it really very well indeed. At best, frankly, it looked like sharp practice from the French. At worst, it would have been cheating. And England against Ireland in Dublin, well, again, I think probably the Irish came up with their best rugby in terms of the physicality, the intensity, the suffocating nature of their defence. They were brilliant, absolutely brilliant in that respect. The weather didn't help in terms of it being an expansive game of rugby, and England were just not there. You know, perhaps all the plaudits that they've been receiving need to be a little bit more measured, because that was a match that, frankly, I think we've seen many, many times before in Dublin. England teams, you know, go back to 2001 and the foot and mouth game where the Grand Slam was hanging on it. Very similar scenario, very similar setup, very similar weather. 2011, again, England going for the Grand Slam. So whilst it's a major setback, and I think there are one or two players who will be looking rather nervously over their shoulder over the coming weeks and months, certainly the older guys, the Haskells, the Hartleys, perhaps the Tom Woods, the Mike Browns of this world. You know, Eddie Jones is ruthless, and it will be very interesting to see how he responds to that over the coming weeks and months, because he knows that he now needs to build for the World Cup. When he came into England, he said he wanted to have a 4-year plan broken down into 2 parts. 2 years with the foundation team, as he called it, and 2 years building his World Cup team. And I think it could prove quite an interesting period for a number of players.
Staying with rugby and in France, it looks as though fans from Stade Francais and Racing 92 have got their way. Supporters were strongly against a proposed plan to merge the two sides. In what's been a bizarre week for the French league, it now seems that the two of the country's biggest sides won't be joining forces after all. Here's Lance Santos.
The merger between two of the biggest rugby clubs in Paris is officially off. Last week, Racing 92 and Stade Francais shocked the world with the announcement that they were to join forces and create a Parisian super club. The proposed marriage of rivals came out of the blue to the fans, who instantly divorced any notion of giving up their history to create a shared future.
C'est pas un attachement borné au Stade Français, c'est parce que derrière il y a une histoire.
This isn't a blinkered attachment we have to Stade Francais. It's because behind all this there's a story, a relationship. Plus, we can't forget about the human aspect of this all, the way it was announced to the players. Tomorrow, half of the team are going to be out of a job, and that's without taking into account all the people who work behind the scenes. We're here to show them we're completely behind them, and we will fight this to the end.
The planned merger has courted criticism since last Monday's announcement, which stunned players from both clubs, including those on international duty with France. Stade Francais players began an open-ended strike last week, denouncing what they called a takeover in disguise, while the French Federation and the Paris mayor also opposed the merger. With the players not willing to play, the controversial announcement ended up with fixtures being called off.
Paradoxically, it's the Racing players that have asked for their match. The Stade Francais players have not clarified their positions. They've said that if they adjust, well, adjust isn't really the right word, but they've said that they would not go to Castres.
With the deal off, the problems facing the clubs in Paris and the French league in general are growing larger by the day. Both sides struggle to fill out their stadiums, players are on huge money contracts, and with so much foreign influence in the league, the French, and in particular those in the capital, are losing their appetite for rugby. And when that happens, financial problems are only around the corner.
Let's bring in rugby journalist Gavin Mortimer, who is live in Paris for us. Gavin, thanks for coming on the show. Now, it only took them 6 days to call off this project. Does that mean that it was never a good idea, even in the first place?
I think it's a good idea, and I think a number of people think it is, in essence, a good idea. It was clumsily handled, and it was so brutally done that such a shock to so many people that the emotions were so raw last week. And the animosity, the insults that were being traded, particularly at the two presidents, I think in the end they just decided on Friday night, there was a meeting on Friday, they just said to themselves, you know, it's just not worth it, let's call the whole thing off. And so on Sunday morning they made the announcement, the deal is, the merger is not taking place.
Well, that shock was particularly big for the players, who even went on strike saying they felt that it was a takeover in disguise. Why such intense criticism from the players?
it's imagine you go to work on a Monday morning expecting a hard day's training, and you're suddenly told that your job is on the line. And of course, professional rugby, if you're a player, is a cutthroat business. And so many players are foreign. They've made a huge commitment. They've come from Australia, New Zealand, South Africa to Paris to play professional rugby. And suddenly they're in an alien culture. And suddenly they're being told, thanks very much, but you're probably not going to have a job. So that, I think, was really behind it too. And just, as I said, there's absolutely no hint in the media that this was going to happen. No, neither president had said, we're thinking about it. It was just so out of the blue.
Okay, about the president, he actually said that he doesn't have enough money to keep the 14-time champion going. Is this a legitimate claim to try and get is this a legitimate concern, or is this him just trying to attempt to get this bid pushed through?
No, it's a legitimate concern. And I have a deal of sympathy for Thomas Savard, the Stade Francais president, who stepped in 6 years ago and saved Stade Francais from bankruptcy. And he's put in upwards of 30 million euros of his own money. And now is the time he wants to sell. And don't forget that Stade Francais don't own their ground. It's owned by the Paris City Council. So really, they've just got a name. And he's hemorrhaging money. And this was a way, he thought, of keeping the club going. Yes, it was more an acquisition than a merger, but nonetheless, it would have kept the club going to an extent. And the fear is now that he said, I'm giving it 3 months. And if I can't find a buyer in 3 months, then the club will go into liquidation. So this is where we are now. So Stade Francais supporters and players may be rejoicing, thinking they've won this particular battle, but they have not by any means won the war.
Okay, Gavin, very quickly, what else can clubs do? Because we know that in French, it's been suggested in the French league, other clubs are also facing similar problems financially. So is there anything else that they could do to try and avoid these situations, these problems?
No, not really. Today, Albi, a club in the second division, they announced that they're in financial trouble. And Thomas Savard said in a rather angry interview with one of the French newspapers today, we've got to face up to the fact that we, French rugby, we're living beyond our means. And at the moment, we're on a drip, and we're not in good health. And he's absolutely right. And clubs are spending too much on salaries. They're not getting enough spectators in, and no one really is addressing the issue. And they need to address it quickly because more clubs will run into financial trouble.
Great, Gavin. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, Roger Federer beat fellow Swiss Stan Wawrinka 6-4, 7-5 to win a 5th career title at Indian Wells. The world number 6 remained cool in the desert for his 2nd win of the season and defied his veteran status. Peter Franks has more on the return of the Fed Express.
35 is the new 19, or so it would seem for Roger Federer, who claimed his 90th career title at Indian Wells with victory over fellow countryman Stan Wawrinka.
It felt so good, and then the confetti was flying, you're holding up a trophy and you're standing there, the music's playing and the crowds are standing, and it's an incredible start to the year. I can't believe it. I mean, last year I didn't win any titles. It was such a difficult year and I'm still only in my comeback, and I'm able to play such great tennis. It's such a treat, and look, I'm going to celebrate the 90th title, a lot tonight, tomorrow, the next day.
The Swiss has had a brilliant start to the season, claiming a 5th Australian Open and now a 5th title in the desert, despite his advancing years.
My racket helps him with extra power these days. It's not like it used to be where I had to generate most of it by myself and I had a lot of accuracy. So that's good, and honestly, if I'm in good shape, the serve is going to work. The question is the footwork going to be there? Is the mind going to be there? That's what I have to worry about, and that's what I'm going to be speaking to the team about, how we're going to do the best job possible, that I will always be energized and excited when I walk on court.
With the drop-off and injuries to Andy Murray and Novak Djokovic, the 18-time Grand Slam champion can continue to climb the rankings.
My goal last November, December was to be maybe top 8 after Wimbledon, and here I am already number 6 or 7, I'm not sure what my ranking is, so I'm very pleased, so from that standpoint I have zero pressure there. I can just play freely or not play at all and just really go back into the gym, go back onto the practice court, and then come back really strong onto the tour. But first things first, I'll focus on Miami, try to back it up from here, and then we'll see where we go from there.
The turnaround at the top of the men's game has been remarkable. The old guard have usurped the new, with one of the greatest players of all time continuing to reinforce that name tag, when many had advised it was probably time for the Fed Express to slow down.
Well, safe to say, I think there's definitely no signs of the Fed Express slowing down anytime soon. Now, earlier we spoke with tennis writer Ben Rothenberg and started by asking him if we should be surprised by Federer's recent run of form.
I don't think there's a reason not to be surprised completely just on paper, because he is 35 years old. He's the oldest ever Masters Series champion by winning Indian Wells. And he came off a year that was very up and down and was one of the most uncertain of his career, with long injury layoffs quite a few times. So there wasn't very high expectations for Roger coming in 2017. That being said, the seas have parted for him a bit. Djokovic and Murray have both had less than stellar starts to the year. They both failed to reach the quarterfinals at either Australian Open or Indian Wells, and now they both pulled out of Miami. So there is a bit of an open path here for Federer that he's taking advantage of that I don't think people thought it would be there for him. I think he did enough, even with that one free pass against Kyrgios, and then not the toughest semifinal opponent with Jack Sock being in his first semi. I think still it was a very, very true and legit run. I think it's pretty hard to question it. In both Australia and Indian Wells, he beat Rafael Nadal, who's been considered his utter nemesis throughout his career, and he did times both so, especially in Indian Wells, in incredibly convincing fashion, beating him only in 68 minutes in Indian Wells. And it was just one of the biggest thrashings that Federer has ever given to Nadal. And so I think that validates any sort of run he had. And then he was very good against Stan Wawrinka, who is the U.S. Open champion most recently, a three-time major winner, and a tough player. So we've seen this trend in tennis, both men's and women's, of champions getting older and older. And also, conversely, the new generation not being able to break through at all. And these same old champions, old relatively when it comes to, Djokovic and Murray only turning 30 this year, but still that was considered past peak and decades ago in tennis for sure. These guys are showing that there can be life after 30, even at 35. And Federer looks fresh and ready to go. And you're right, his backhand has been incredibly impressive. That's the one shot that stood out most. He has a newfound confidence in it, newfound intensity on it and focus on it. And it's turned into a really devastating weapon, even against Nadal, against whom it had previously been a pretty clear liability. And he's also has been a bit cagey about what he thinks his clay court scheduling is going to be. He might play a very light schedule on the European clay this year, maybe even possibly skipping the French Open. We're not sure. And so Miami would stand then as the last big event he has for quite a few months. And that would mean he could give his all, even if he is a bit tired from having played those 5 matches in Indian Wells. They weren't the most physically taxing matches. And I would think having a bit of a mini finish line in sight at the end of Miami could give him a sort of a second wind.
Two of world cricket's best sides went toe-to-toe in Ranchi, but neither could land a knockout blow. India and Australia have slugged out an engrossing draw in the third test of their already gripping series. A dogged batting performance from Peter Hanscom and Sean Marsh helped Australia escape. The pair batted for more than 5 hours on the final day, soaking up 62 overs. With the series now locked at 1 apiece, both sides move on to Dar es Salaam, where we will hopefully get a winner.
So look, perspectives are different. We obviously will look at our positives, like how we turned the match in just 1 innings and we didn't even have to bat again, and that they had to fight for a draw. They will look at their positives, we will look at our positives, and with just 1 match remaining, I think both teams will give their all in the last match.
I think India coming today would have expected to bowl us out, and I'm sure they're hurting a little bit in their change room right now. So if there's anything called momentum in cricket, it's probably on our side at the minute. But having said that, it's 1-1, and we're playing a decider, I guess, in Dharamsala, which is really exciting, and the group's really looking forward to it now.
This was a test match very much for the purist. Lower scoring rates, dogged batting, and a game that well and truly lasted 5 days. But is this style of cricket a thing of the past? Can Test cricket survive? Well, to help us answer that question, I sat down with Australian great Steve Waugh.
Yeah, look, I don't necessarily subscribe to the fact that it's dying. I think in some countries it's going really well, but Australia maybe has a proven model of playing day-night Test cricket. I think that's something that can reinvigorate the game in a lot of countries, and that's really important to do. But I think it's the players have got a role and responsibility to say that Test cricket is still a pinnacle of the game. 2020 is fantastic, you make a lot of money and it's very commercial. But Test cricket is the only place where you can truly test how good you are as a player. So I hope it's going to continue, but the authorities got to make sure it's interesting. And day-night Test cricket has been a huge success in Australia. Countries like South Africa, maybe India, New Zealand, they should have some day-night Test matches.
Are you concerned that T20 cricket is actually going to be taking centre stage in the game? And do you think it has the potential to destroy young players in terms of their technique and their development?
Yeah, look, it's confusing, I think, even for spectators following the Australian cricket side. They're not sure who's in what side and which games are on. And as you say, we've got to prepare for a tour to India, and some players are in Dubai training, other guys there in New Zealand. The players are all over the place. So it's a bit of a mixed schedule right now. And South Africa have just announced they've got a new T20 competition. We've got the Big Bash, there's the IPL. There's so many competitions. As a spectator, it's confusing. It's great for the players. They're making a lot of money. But I think we've got to be a bit more coordinated in our approach. And yeah, it can affect techniques. I think you see a lot of the guys go out and playing Test cricket and they're playing shots that they wouldn't normally play, but because they've been playing Big Bash or a 2020 form of the game, it can be a little bit confusing. So you've really got to keep working your technique and concentrate and make sure that you can move between the sports.
So we see that 3 of the best batsmen are currently captains of their respective national teams. As somebody who has managed both, how do you actually manage both of those aspects of captaining and being a batsman at the same time?
Well, I think some players really elevate their games when they get responsibility. Steve Smith has done it, Virat Kohli has done it, and I think Joe Root will do that as well. He's a great player, he's got a really good technique. He seems to be an inspirational type of player. He thrives on responsibility. But I'd say to him, make sure you're scoring runs first, because then it's a lot easier to captain your side. If you're in bad form and you're thinking about your batting and then you're trying to make decisions for the team, you can get a bit muddled. So make sure you're scoring runs. And my advice to any captain is to follow your gut instinct, to do it your way, to don't captain like someone else has done it, but to find your own way. So, I mean, we had a great side, but we had players who wanted to do well and wanted to be the best. So you've got to try and make sure that everyone's going in the same direction and the team is the #1 priority. So there are different challenges for different captains. You know, Steve Smith has had a lot of turnover of players, so just managing those players and then getting a stable side is what he wants. Virat Kohli is a very aggressive captain, so that the team plays in his mould. And then Joe Root has got to find his feet and work out what his style is. So there's always a challenge as a captain, whether you've got a really good side or a young side or one in transition.
Lovely man, Steve Waugh. Now, for our feel-good moments of the day, Australian surfer Owen Wright has won the Gold Coast Pro on his return to the Champions Tour at Snapper Rocks. But the story doesn't end there. For a surfer fighting for his life just over a year ago, Wright may have pulled off the greatest comeback in surfing history. Samantha Johnson fills us in.
Sport has a habit of throwing up some incredible comebacks. Well, now you can add Owen Wright to the list, after he made a winning return in the first surfing major of the year.
Oh, that felt amazing. Geez, I got pretty emotional afterwards. Just had a lot for me building up into it.
The Australian suffered a serious brain injury 14 months ago in Hawaii's legendary pipeline, and it was an injury that not only could have ended his career, but his life.
It was no doubt the hardest year of my life and biggest roller coaster, but once I got free of that, I feel on the other side of it now, and I feel better and stronger and a bit more excited than ever to have this rash shirt on again and compete. And man, there was nothing I wanted more than to just go out there and just smash a few waves, and I got to do it. I was so stoked.
His return is even more remarkable when you consider he was unable to talk and suffered memory loss and didn't get back on the board until 4 months after the accident.
Oh man, I think it was the start of February. I was sitting in the doctor's office and there was question marks on the year. So to be sitting here right now, and we just pushed hard and went hard, and I confronted every fear of getting back into it, you know, and yeah, there was a lot of fears pushed through to get back into the sport and back into what pretty much took me out and could have taken me out forever.
But to get to his 3rd WSL title, there was another small hurdle. He had to battle against a familiar face.
To have that final with one of my best mates was just, I'm over the moon, and I'm just so stoked.
In front of friends, family and fans, he beat Wilkinson by 14.66 points to 13.50 and dedicated his win to his partner Kit and son Varley, making this win on and off the waves the most emotional victory in the sport.
That's all the time we've got for today. We'll leave you with some fun pictures from the Cape Epic mountain bike race in South Africa. Enjoy.